Welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes. I'm joined by Kevin McCluskey. It's a big game tonight. Kevin, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling confident, Paul. I'm confident, thinking happy thoughts, positive thoughts that we can do this, get the result that keeps the Champions League dream alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know this, right? It's great to be positive, but it's also great to be able to try and back it up a wee bit because there's been a wee bit of doom and gloom around Celtic's performances recently. I'm going to bring up some of the comments in the next half hour or so. I'm going to start actually with Paddy. Paddy Lavery, welcome back to the show. I hope you're doing well. You're wearing the Acsom hoops there over in Ardoyne. Thank you very much for your support. Evening all. Hopefully no mistakes tonight. I'm looking at you, Joe Hart. Now, the reason I brought this up isn't to start off on a negative or start off getting on at Joe Hart, but I was having a look at the last game against Leipzig, and obviously we came in a half-time a goal down, and we spoke about, the importance in the next goal, should we make any changes, etc. What Celtic did was we came out in the second half and we brought ourselves back, we pulled ourselves back into the game. You and I, we'd spoken about Jota, the fact that he, make his mark in that particular game. And he did just that. He pulled it back to 1-1. And, by 55 minutes, when, you're looking at the chances for and against, we were level at that stage, Kevin. We were level with Leipzig in terms of the chances created. Then what happens, of course, is that Hart does the unthinkable in 64 minutes, following a period of intense Celtic pressure. So we'd got the goal back, we're then putting them under pressure, and then Hart does something that we really wouldn't have expected of one of our most experienced players. So the reason I'm bringing that up from Paddy is I think that created a hugely different outcome on the entire game. It's not as if, we got a goal back, but then they overpowered us, Kevin. I just think we gave them that inch and they took it. And by the way, did they take it? They absolutely did. The third goal was a thing of beauty. If you could say that about a goal against Celtic, I'm not sure if I'm allowed. But up to that point, what I'm saying is we were going toe-to-toe with them. We weren't containing them. We were creating as many chances as they were, Kevin. So I think it is important to talk about the mistake because the margin in that game, we were punished for that. We were punished in a bad way. We can't allow that to happen tonight.
We can. And we spoke about this last week at half time, and I think we touched on it again at full time. Again, just how closely we ran them for so long in the match. Mm-hmm. There was this spell. I'm trying to check back in my notes from last week as well because I've got them here in front of me. I think it's before their first goal. We've got those 3 shots in a minute, kind of one after the other. We were creating chances against them, and we were getting them behind, and there was hope that we could get a result. The difference is, and the thing is that, and you don't like to say it, they're a touch above us at the moment. They are a classy side. And when they got their one chance, they finished it. And that was the difference. It was just being more clinical in front of goal. But then, Jota gets the goal at the start of the second half again. We didn't give up in the style of play that we had and what we were doing. All the good things we kept on doing. It's unfortunate what happened for the second goal because that did kill us. Mm-hmm. Right? And I don't think there's anybody going to try and make any excuses for Joe Hart for that one. It's a howler. But he's got to be big enough to get over that. He's experienced enough to get over it, you would think. It has cost us the game because you could see visibly, I think, heads went down because of that. But then that's something, again, that the team just needs to work on. Just having that wee bit of mentality that, right, for 63 minutes, we've given this team a good game, away from home in a tough venue. They've had chances and they were probably just edging it at that point, but we were still in it. And you feel that if we'd get the second goal, we could have went on to win that game or draw the game. Losing the second goal, it was the killer, and it's the way that it happened. And you've got to think that's a one-off moment in a game. Fingers crossed, touch wood, all that thing. It's not going to repeat again tonight. So we can start with a clean slate and go out and, impose ourselves, play our game. Me and you will sit here and try and be as positive as we can and actually convince ourselves, you know what? We could get the result. We can do this.
Yeah, it's still on in my mind. I mean, looking at stats and data is something that you, I think it's one of the things that you see it as a necessary evil or you really enjoy the data, and I think the journey that Kevin Graham's been on, Kevin, since we started doing Acsom, has been tremendous. A guy who had no interest whatsoever in data analysis has kind of got into it. I'm just expecting to see a whiteboard behind him any Wednesday soon when he starts explaining the reason why we lost goals and lost games, etc. Hopefully, we're not talking about losing this one. But yeah, I am pretty optimistic because I do see it as individual errors creating the whole ebb and flow of that game and really making a huge momentum shift on that particular night. And I think that when you look back to the Shakhtar Donetsk game away, we came away from that game thinking, you know what, we created enough chances, we had enough dominance of the possession to win that game, and we came away with a point away from home in the Champions League disappointed, which I think speaks volumes. And in the first game, you know, that magical figure of 55 minutes, we did match Real Madrid for 55 minutes. So I think the three games, Kevin, we've got what-if moments, what-if scenarios. The first one being McGregor's shot that rifled in on the inside of the post but didn't go in. The Maeda chance at the beginning of the second half. We do have these what-if moments. Then you said earlier on, what if Joe Hart doesn't do that and we take the lead in Germany? What happens then? And I know that people can say, you know, you're just guessing, you know, the what-if game. But it is the margins that we seem to have suffered from in these three European games so far.
Yeah, it is all if buts and might have beens after the event. You know, when you talk about what could have been, but you know that team that we've got, you know the ability they've got, and if they had got their noses in front, would you fancy Celtic to have won that game, to have closed it out? There's a pretty good chance that we could have. Excuse me, or at least, as I said, maybe we don't win the game, but we probably don't lose it either. We come away with another valuable away point. And you can go even further back in the game against Madrid, the very first minute, when Leila Bada's through.
I know.
Now, if that falls to him 5 minutes later, or if it's Kyogo perhaps is a wee bit more experienced, then could we have taken the lead against Real Madrid in the first minute of the first game in the Champions League group stage? And I mean, that was unthinkable before the game. But we've got ourselves into positions now where we actually can look back and rue missed opportunities in games. Whereas maybe a couple of seasons ago, we'd have been steamrolled by Madrid and by Leipzig, and you'd have been sitting in after the match with your head in your hands, or you'd just be singing the praises of the team that's just stumped us. Now we're actually coming in, and we're acknowledging that we've come up against a very good side, a side that deserved to win, but a side that had things gone slightly differently, we might have beaten, or we might have held to a draw. And that's where we get the optimism from, that we can go and win these games. And it might be unfounded a little bit, but, you know, for the first time in a while, you do actually believe that we can do it. And there's nothing wrong with having that bit of belief, because if you don't have it, there's no point in being here.
Well, we take into account, Kevin, the fact that we have the green-tinted spectacles on at all times. Absolutely, we're football fans. Emotions play a part in the way that we conduct ourselves on this show. However, we try to be as balanced as possible. And I think that when I go back, here's the klaxon, enter Brendan Rodgers. When I go back to the Brendan Rodgers era in terms of the Champions League and the European performances, there was a real sense of naivety about the performances, Kevin, that I don't think we have that. I wouldn't say that the mistakes or the near misses we've had in this campaign so far is down to naivety. We are, as a group, and on this stage, as we spoke about in the last game, an inexperienced group of players. There are players here who didn't make 8 players didn't make their Champions League debut until this season. The first time they kicked a ball in the Champions League proper, not the qualifiers, was this season against Real Madrid. Stephen Welsh made his debut against Leipzig in the last game, his Champions League debut. So we are an inexperienced starting 11, an inexperienced squad even, because in the last game you had Callum McGregor. I had all the figures and I was actually surprised. I think he'd only played 11 Champions League games in the group stages. Joe Hart had something like 45 under his belt. And I think Jota had a couple prior to coming to Celtic, so he was more experienced than most. We're an inexperienced team at this level. So, people might say, well, that's the very definition of naivety. I think that the naivety we've seen under Brendan Rodgers was trying to go toe-to-toe with a team that could carve you up and put you to the sword, which they did. I've not seen us getting punished like that. That's what I'm, looking back to the Leipzig game, I'm saying, Kevin, it wasn't as though they absolutely gave us a tanking that night. We did up to their second goal, 64, which we gave them. Joe Hart sold the jerseys. We were going toe to toe. We had created as many chances as they had. So I don't think we've been steamrollered. Even when you look at the Real Madrid game, 3 goals, we weren't steamrollered in that game. And when I look at tonight, there's a couple of things I think that may well work in our favour. We're keen to get as many comments up on the screen as possible. Anything goes. The Marquee Player Network, any beer recommendations? Well, believe it or not, Kevin, I'm sorry, right? I'm not a beer fan. I've never have been. I don't drink beer or lager. So I can't give you any
You think you know
recommendations.
someone, eh? You think you know someone when they come up with that revelation.
I know,
Unreal.
I know. I'm sorry. I've no late earned my Spurs. I'll not tell you what's in this cup because it isn't general tea, and I get a lot of stick for that as well. Paul McLean isn't sharing our optimism, Kevin. Celtic won, Leipzig 3. Most realistic outcome is third place was always the target. Listen, if that happens, we will pick away at the bones of any result, any performance, and we'll try and see what we can do better. But I think that I've said time and time again this season, Ange Postecoglou is a quick learner. And yeah, it's came up to opposition, so feel free to disagree in the comment section. And I think what you can gauge that on this season, Kevin, right, is if we compare the first 3 group matches against this second group stage, where we've got another 3 games, albeit 2 of them are at home, and I totally get that, right? And compare and contrast the results. Because I'm pretty sure that what we've learned, this is going back to Chris Julien's statement about the video analysis, what Ange has learned from the first 3 games, he will put that into practice tonight and in the next 2 games. And I think what you'll see is Celtic eliminating a lot of the threats, but also homing in on some of the weaknesses that have been identified in the first 3 games. Are you of the same belief? I mean, there are some in the comments reckoning that Leipzig are going to come and get a similar scoreline that they did at home. I'm thinking we're going to make it more difficult for them.
Well, I think we've seen enough of Leipzig last week for it to be suggested that they could get a similar result because they are a very good team and they've got a lot of really skillful players, really technically gifted players. And Kunku was incredible last week and ran the show. Soboslai, I've got a soft spot for him with him being the Hungarian, but he is also another top talent in the team. They've got lots of good players in there. But at the same time, I do also think that Celtic can get the result tonight. And again, we spoke about this last week. You can have these 2 opposing views of understanding that your opponent is a very good team and could win the game, but also thinking that we can win the game.
Yeah.
You made the points about us kind of not being as naive anymore and what have you, and I agree with that. And I'll go back to my points that I've made before about Brendan Rodgers and his team, that he was a fantasist when it came to Europe. Mm-hmm. Because he wanted us to play against Barcelona in the Nou Camp with the same way that we would play against Partick Thistle at home in a league game.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. You cannot go into that game with the same approach. You will get ripped apart, and we were ripped apart. With Postecoglou, it's the same principles he wants to apply in every game, but he will tweak the way that we go about and do it. Joe Hart doesn't come 40 yards off his line in a European game because he knows he'll get punished. He stays deeper. Juranovic and Taylor might not always come in field as much. They might stay a little bit wider depending on the opposition. He does learn. He does change. And he, as you said, he does the video analysis. He pinpoints the weaknesses in the opposition team for us to go and target. But he'll pinpoint their threats as well so that we're lined up to cope against that within our structure. And we've got the ability to transition into the attack and capitalise on their mistakes and their deficiencies. So, going into these games, seeing the improvements that we've made game on game in Europe last season gives you the confidence and the belief that we can do the same this year. Proof will be in the pudding. We can review, the second lot of 3 results against the first lot come the end of it and see if we did learn from our mistakes, if we did make improvements. and you can analyse it at the end. But right now, going into the second set of 3 games, I am confident we can get a better return on points than we did in the first. Having the 2 home games massively helps us with the crowd behind us. And we'll see. We'll see where we're at come the end of the night. We might be sitting here with the Champions League dream over, or we might be sitting here going, do you know what? Second place is back on.
It's back on. Yeah, I like that. I like the positivity, Kevin. Scott Howe, welcome back. Nice avatar.
I'm accused by my wife all the time of being the realist in the family and killing all the dreams. But when it comes to this at the moment, I can't help myself. I'm full of kind of hope and optimism about the team, and it is because of the way that Ange makes you feel. If it was any other manager, you probably wouldn't have that same hope and confidence. But there's just something about him that inspires you. The kind of guy you'd run through a brick wall for no good reason.
I know, just so that you don't get that look that he does tend to give a lot of journalists in Scotland. Exactly. Let's do this enormous. I know, enormous performance required. Absolutely, there is, Scott. I'm not taking for granted the enormity of the task this evening. So I totally agree with that. Don't let us down, Celtic. Hail. I think that if we go about our business and we cut down on the individual errors, then we'll be sitting at half-time, hopefully looking at a scoreline that gives us the optimism to move into the second half of the game. As I say, keep the comments coming in. Ewan Boy Martin, welcome back. I hope you're well, Ewan. Been too long since we last won in the Champions League. Hopefully tonight is the night. Absolutely agree with that as well. And Jungle Lion, who one of these days will host Acsom in his phenomenal man shed. Right, check it out on Twitter. Have to be solid at the back and ruthless up top. Spine has to play well. We've been talking about the team, and I'm sure everybody in the comments section has already seen the Celtic lineup. But what I hope to do is share that with you, and we'll have a wee run through that as well. So let's bring the team up on the screen, Kevin. We'll start off with the Celtic side. We'll also have a look at the opposition based on the performance the last time round, see who we're going to be keeping an eye on beyond the obvious. So here's the Celtic lineup. Let me just double check that you can see everybody on there, including the subbies. You can. Brilliant. So we've got Joe Hart, Josip Juranovic at right back. The central defensive partnership of Jens and Carter Vickers, will come back to that to see how important that's going to be, with Greg Taylor on the left. The question around the midfield is how they're going to line up. I think that you've got O'Reilly stepping in, would you say, to the Callum McGregor berth, with Haksabanovic stepping into the O'Reilly berth? Kevin, that's a debate. It will soon be answered. And Hatate is in there as well. And then up top, Abada, Maeda and Kyogo. There was a lot of predictions in terms of the lineup. Couple of interesting ones in there. I'm going to go right back to the defence first of all. Let's have a look at the central defensive partnership. That's something we didn't have in the first game against Leipzig, Kevin. I think we know how important it is. Carter Vickers has been given the captain's armband. I keep going on about the momentum and the flow of Celtic's play and how it starts often with the two centre-halves. And I was loath to overly criticise any of the two replacements, one of whom is playing this evening, in Maurice Jens. But what I was pretty critical about is how it affected our overall game in relation to starting at the back and building the moves from the two central defenders. I think having Carter Vickers in there is massive, and I hope we've seen a return of sorts to that at the weekend. When we look at, for example, the amount of balls that are played out from the central defensive area in the last game, they were mainly played to Taylor and Juranovic, right? So I think that gives you that idea of the playing it around the back, Kevin, whereby Hart to one of the centre halves to one of the fullbacks and trying to build it from there. And it can work, but obviously if you want to change the tempo, get them on their back foot, get in behind the defenders, etc., often it's good to miss out the inverted fullbacks. That wasn't happening a lot. Hatate got a lot of the ball from the centre-halves as well. Is that a feature of the game that you think will return now that Carter Vickers is back in the team?
I think it will. I think that's one of his strengths that he brings to us. It's just, as well as being a kind of a calming influence at the back and a dominating figure in the air. He's also really good with the ball at his feet, which is probably an underrated skill of his. And one of those things that quite a few players that we've got in the team, you don't miss what they bring until they're not there.
Yeah.
And that ability that he's got to kind of step out from the back and then play the pass that breaks the lines, as they say, and like miss out the midfield, take it a bit more direct, find one of the wingers or your attacking midfield player. I mean, it makes a big difference. A pass like that can take us 15, 20 yards up the field in one go and take out 2 or 3 of their players is massive to us in the way that we want to play, and that speed and quickness and directness, rather than always going out wide and having it, bringing it back in. The slow build-up is fine at times, but to have that different outlet, being able just to cut through a bit more direct, we miss it when he's not there. So it's a big boost to us attacking-wise to have Carter Vickers back in the defence, as much as it is, for that defensive solidity, which we definitely missed last week with not having him there.
I think back to, people might say stop living in the past, but as an example, I think back to the way that Chris Ayer used to roam around the park. He would go on these lung bursting runs, wouldn't he, 40, 50 yards. And by that time, it could well be a case of the midfield have been missed out entirely, and before you know it, we're in the final third. So that's one way of progressing the play. I think Stephen Welsh does that in a different way. I don't think he's as dynamic when he's got the ball at his feet. I do think he's good with his distribution, Kevin, but often when he goes on those Ayer-esque runs, I'm pretty sure he looks up and there's less options available to him due to the fact that it's less dynamic and it's of a lower tempo. Then you get someone like Carter Vickers, and his distribution is phenomenal. And I think I appreciate why the central defenders were playing the ball to Hatate a lot, because he's the type of guy who can do the crossfield pass and he can play in the wingers and behind the defenders. So I really am hoping that we get a return to that. Another thing I found interesting is in terms of our most attacking threat against Leipzig last time round, we had Hatate, Jota and Matt O'Reilly. That might not surprise many of you listening in, but of course we don't have Jota tonight. So I want to bring that up because that's going to be a massive loss. As is Callum McGregor. We'll come back to Callum. But Jota, for me, I think he was finding his feet in the Champions League last time round, Kevin, and then he misses tonight's game. Huge loss for us, isn't it?
He is, but I'm going to slightly disagree with you on this one. As much as I love Jota, and I think he's a fantastic player, and he is a massive miss, right? I'm not going to say that he's not. I think he's struggled a little bit at this level so far. He was up against Carvajal in the first game against Real Madrid, so you're not expecting anything there. First half against Donetsk, he could easily have been the man that came off instead of Haksabanovic, I think it was, in that game. And then he stepped up a bit in the second half. Mm-hmm. He would put, I thought, in the first half against Leipzig, and I think we spoke about that at half-time as well, but then he gets the goal at the start of the second half. For me, he hasn't quite done it enough yet consistently throughout each of the 3 games to say that he's really ready or announced himself yet at this level. But if there was a game set up for him, it's probably this one, because we're at home and it's a winnable match, or it's a game where we're going to look to a player to pull something out of the ordinary for us, and that's what he can do. So he's undoubtedly a miss, but he hasn't performed to the level that we know he can so far. And he's not there now, so you've got to look and say, okay, it's Abada that's really come in for him. He's a different kind of player. It changes the way we're going to play. Mm-hmm. Let's not worry so much about Jota as such, because he's not there to influence the game now. So let's just see what Abada can do. While he'll play the game differently, and he might have the attributes to win this game for us today, because he's not that skillful player that Jota is. He's not going to do the same things, and he scores goals in big games, and he's done it against Rangers a few times. He comes in with the goals in the big games. Yeah. So maybe this is a one that's set up for him. You've got to hope so, because he's the man in the team. So let's hope it could be his night tonight.
I'm going to go for, and by the way, I'm sorry, I don't like beer and lager. There's the first revelation. And I also don't gamble. But if I was a gambling man, I would go for, listen, I've got plenty of vices, but just not those two. I would go for Abada open the scoring tonight. I think, there'll be a wee bit part of him as well, thinking about that Real Madrid game, I think, Kevin. You know what I mean? His development has been incredible since he came into the Celtic side as a teenager, and this is part of that development. A bit like what you were saying there about Jota. This is part of him, progressing as a player, as an individual. Maybe Jota's saving his moment for the Bernabeu. We shall wait and see for that one.
You never know. Do you know,
well.
if we need a last-minute goal to go through in the Bernabeu in the last game and Jota gets it,
we'll take it.
Would that just be the thing?
Yeah, Brown Warrior, absolutely. Welcome back, Brown Warrior. You are saying Welsh carries the ball better than Starfelt. I would tend to agree with that, because I think the thing with Starfelt, and again it goes back to identifying weaknesses, I think that the opposition will just approach him from a certain angle to try and get the ball on his left foot, and they know that as soon as he's on his left foot, he's not as comfortable, Kevin. So when he's trying to travel with the ball, I think it's a little bit easier to break down the move if Starfelt's got the ball at his feet. In saying all that, I am looking forward to Starfelt coming back. So it just shows you again that you do miss them once they're not there, Kevin, that's for sure. The other thing again is looking at the formation. I'll come back to Acsom in a second, and we'll have a wee look at the bench before it kicks off. But it looked as though Leipzig stuck to their 4-2-3-1 formation pretty rigidly, actually, regardless of how Celtic were playing and how they were coming more and more into the game. So I don't know if they would change that away from home, but I'll be interested to see. Quick look at the bench with Bain, Siegrist, Giakoumakis, of course, who scored that memorable winner. Will he be feeling a wee bit hard done by, do you think, on the bench, first of all, Kevin? Giakoumakis?
He probably will be.
Yeah.
And it's one of those ones, it's a head scratcher at times, that when a big game comes around, Kyogo gets the nod every time ahead of Giakoumakis. Yeah. And it doesn't matter what Giakoumakis seems to have done the week before. Maybe Ange just sees him more as an impact player for these kind of games. The guy that can come on for the last 20 minutes. Once the defence is tired, we kind of trot that line out a bit, but maybe the defence tires, he comes on and kind of ragdolls them for the last 20 minutes when they don't want that kind of player. But he's a forward, he's a goal scorer, he's just scored at the weekend, his confidence is bound to be high. Perfect time to play him from the start. Mm-hmm. So it is. I mean, that's maybe one surprise from the starting lineup, that he's benched or kept Giakoumakis in the bench and not put him in place of Kyogo.
What I like about Giakoumakis, I can't see the guy sulking about this. I think he's the type of player, from what I've seen so far, who'll actually see it as a challenge. And he'll want to prove himself again once he gets the minutes tonight. Moy, Turnbull, McCarthy, big plaudits for McCarthy when he came on. Did his job at the weekend there. Bernabeu played very, very well. Gave the manager plenty to think about. Abiel Guard, I'm not sure if that's right, but it's better than the commentator's pronunciation at the weekend. Robertson, Forrest, Ralston and Welsh. And mentioning Ralston, I've got to mention Amy Canavan. I was meant to be on the show on Monday, of course, but we had an interview with Stuart Braithwaite of Mogwai. Can't wait to share that with everybody on the channel. So Amy's last appearance, for now, I missed it, Kevin. But I want to wish Amy all the very best. She's a very, very talented broadcaster, and I think that you'll see a hell of a lot more of her on bigger platforms. Loads to come from Amy. It's been an absolute pleasure to have her as part of the team, not just for Acsom, but in the studio interviewing all and sundry in here. And I think she's come on leaps and bounds, and good luck to Amy as well, Kevin. Let's finish off with Acsom.
I'll just take the opportunity to second you in that one. Amy's been a great member of the team, very friendly, nice to get on with, knowledgeable about the game. It's knowledge is unreal. So yeah, well done to her, and go and forge yourself a big career.
Yeah, go and smash it. Talking of smashing it, Haksabanovic has been threatening to do something a wee bit special for us. I think that we saw it all coming together at the weekend from time to time, and tonight would be the night. I mean, he's got it in him. He looks like an absolute bargain. Another one to add to the collection for Ange Postecoglou, Kev.
He looks like he's suited to that number 10 role, I think. Mm-hmm. I think when he first came in, we were playing him more out wide, or it certainly did against Shakhtar in the first game. And he was all right, but he looked a bit out of place a little bit, or just not as comfortable. But in the number 10 role, he seems to thrive in it. He's got that freedom to do bits in the middle, but also to pull out wide to either side. He's a skillful player. He's got an eye for a pass. I think he's got a decent shot on him as well. I think what he needed was just minutes and get himself up to match fitness. And we're seeing now, hopefully, that he is another, quality addition to the front line that we've just brought in. And what was it? Less than 2 million, I think. Bring him in could prove to be a very, useful signing for that kind of money.
Yeah, definitely. He had a big move to West Ham. It didn't work out, and sometimes I think that players, when that happens, it didn't happen with a Yeti, unfortunately, but they have something to prove. Hopefully he proves it tonight. Quick prediction before we go to the action. Kevin McCluskey.
Right, well, since I'm in positive mood, there will be goals for both teams and Celtic will edge it 2-1.
Brilliant. I'm going to say clean sheet tonight. There you go. Confidence. Celtic to win 2-0. Let's revisit those predictions. Probably. And a beer drinker. Let's revisit those predictions at half-time. Kevin, enjoy the first half. Join us again at half-time. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved. Thank you to Kevin McCluskey for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.